In the early 70s, a group of students at C.W. Baker High School in Baldwinsville, New York, set out to build a radio station that would create a unique broadcasting experience, not only for them, but for a multitude of generations to come. Nearly a half-century later, it's time to hear firsthand from those who went behind the mic, telling the stories of how this station changed their lives, both in the studio and beyond, as we celebrate 50 years of broadcasting excellence on WBXL 90.5 FM. This is The Buzz Goes Gold.
Hello, welcome to another edition of The Buzz Goes Gold. I'm your host, Jordan Hayes, and I'm very excited to be back here with another esteemed, established WBXL alum. Welcome from the class of 1980. It's Lisa.
That's okay. I call her Walker, but the name that I went by on the radio, most of the places I worked was Lisa Walker, but I used a bunch of different names too.
Okay, so we're going to start from the beginning, as I do with all of my guests. What made you interested in broadcasting and the radio station, and how did you find out about WBXL?
Oh, that's a funny story. My sister and I used to call in to radio talk shows, local talk shows like on WOLF and WFBL, and we used to create personas that were not really us. You know, I used to call myself Lisa Mae Cornstead. Lisa Mae Cornstead, I used to talk like this, like a country hick. And they would love to put me on the radio. And so my sister would do an alien voice called Planet Zor. And so we discovered WBXL while we had moved to Baldwinsville, and we hadn't lived there very long. And we discovered it just by tuning up and down radio dial. And there was an announcer at the time, and I think his real name was Noel Fabretti or Noel something. And he used to call himself Prince Keith on the air. And we started calling into his show on WBXL. And we got to talking to him and discovered that he was a student at Baldwinsville High School, at Baker High School. And my sister and I kind of became fans of WBXL. And we listened to all the DJs there. We were in grades were in. I think I was in 9th grade, and I was over at Durgee, and I think she was in 8th grade at Durgee. So we were not in the high school building. So we became fans, and we started hanging out at WBXL, and I got much more into it than my sister did. And so they let me do a few guest shows. Like I didn't have my own radio show right away. They let me fill in for people and do some guests. Yeah.
And then when you became a sophomore, you must have taken the class, and you signed up for the station full time.
Yeah, I don't think that we had a class back then. I think it was more of a club, and I could be wrong. It might have been a club that you could get credit for. That's possible. I just can't remember, honestly. But, of course, you know, we would meet with Mr. Jenner, and we had club officers, like we had the program director, the engineer, the whole thing. So, yeah, I got a full-time shift, meaning I think I was on the air on Wednesday or Thursday nights, and I made a lot of great friends through the radio station, and it was just was everything that I had wanted to do. And it was kind of neat because you didn't have to worry about the way you looked, because all you had to worry about was what you said and what you played and all that. And I was very interested in going into television. But yes. WBXL kind of made me open the door for radio too. So when I went to college, when I went to Brockport State University, I did both radio and television. And it ended up being that I ended up in radio.
Okay, and we'll get more into that as the episode goes on. But let's talk more about your time at the station. So, what music? So, did you have your own music show, or did you stick with the normal format that was programmed at the station at the time?
At the time, we were allowed as DJs to pick our own music. And we did have to keep a playlist, so we did have to write down what we played. And I think that might have had something to do with ASCAP VMI records. I'm not sure, but we were allowed to pick our own music, and we did take calls for requests, and we played requests, and everything, of course, was on vinyl. There might have been a few songs on cart, but most of it was vinyl back then. And Southern rock was very popular back when I was in high school. Yep. And so was arena rock, like Journey, Styx, Queen, and then the Southern rock, which is Leonard Skinner, 38 Special, The Outlaws, all that.
So if you had to pick a top 3, or even a top 5, let's top 3 songs and artists that you did.
Oh, Queen was my absolute favorite rock band at the time. I was known as, in fact, people knew me. I was in the Queen fan club. I was a very active member of the Queen fan club in England. So Queen was probably my number one favorite. Now, number 2 and 3, that would be too difficult, I think, because there were too many that were all even. I'm going to say I like Journey also. And I like Southern rock. I like quite a bit. Yes. I used to play guitar and sing with my friend Mike McDonald, and he and I used to sing. We did a lot of Dan Fogelberg folk music. We did Neil Young songs. Okay. And so I'm going to say Queen would be number 1. Because of my playing of the guitar, I'd say Neil Young and anything like Neil Young would be like in that group too. And then bands like Journey, those kind of, sometimes they called it corporate rock. I loved that corporate rock sound. Loved it.
Now that's an interesting name, corporate rock.
They called it back then.
Really...
people made fun of it. People made fun of it because they thought it sounded too fake with the synthesizers and all that.
Okay, you would say, so you're saying these are bands similar to Journey. That's corporate rock.
Yeah, that was kind of corporate rock, and I played a lot of those. And like I remember one of the first songs I played on WBXL, I think, was "Wheel in the Sky" from Journey.
Okay, I've never heard of it. It's not a well-known hit. Well, to me, it's not a well-known hit.
No, probably not. But I took lots of requests, and I made many friends at the radio station that I did things with after school. So yeah, it was a great place to hang out and be.
Yeah, so if I were going to ask you, this is my kind of music quiz or music rankings, and then you can give me your opinion on my rankings versus where you would place the ranking. So I'll name a song. So I'll name 2 songs, and I'll since you're a Queen fan, these are going to be mostly Queen. I'm going to ask you, is A or B? Is A is going to be the higher hit? A is the bigger hit.
I got to tell you which one I like best out of the choices.
And not only that, where do you think A goes? So I'm going to give you 2 songs, for example, and you tell me which one you think is the bigger hit. Do you agree with? So I'm going to put 2 songs in order. So here's how it's going to work. I'm going to give you 2 songs in order. The first one I'll tell you I feel was the bigger hit, and then the second song I list will be not much of a hit, and you have to agree or tell me if you agree or disagree. Or disagree.
Okay.
Do you get the format now?
I think I understand it. Yeah.
So the first one, Bohemian Rhapsody over "We Will Rock You." We Will Rock You.
Oh wow, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I am gonna. Oh God, uh, there's just so much there because Bohemian Rhapsody came back in movies and television, and We Will Rock You was constantly played in stadiums all over the world after it became a hit. So I am going to guess Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yes, that's what I would have gone with. I think that, again, I agree with you. Bohemian Rhapsody is one of their best known. That's probably their signature song. If you wanted to identify one song with Queen, it has to be the BR because it's their most recognizable number one. I don't know if it charted at number. Now, I don't know if it actually charted at number one at some point. But
it was close.
Yes, and we're going to do one more, and then we're going to move on with the rest of the podcast. Okay, let's see. Killer Queen over We Are the Champions.
Oh, We Are the Champions.
Definitely, yes. Again, one of their regular hits. And again, usually those two songs, We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions are usually performed together, or they're usually together on one track. That's how I usually see it.
It's true, yes.
They're usually bundled together on one track. Well, thank you for participating in that little ranking game. We're going to move on now. What's the studio equipment like? I imagine in the late 70s and 80s, it wasn't as modern as what we have now. But what you use back then?
What I remember is that the pots were all round. They were not slider pots at that time. And that made it much harder, of course. And we had maybe 3 turntables. I think we had 2 that we used most of the time, and we might have had a third one as a backup. And we had a couple cart machines. I think 2 to 4 cart machines, from what I remember. And we, of course, had stuff to erase the carts with. I think we had a reel-to-reel machine, but I don't remember using it that often. But I'm pretty sure we had one.
Interesting.
And that was what I remember, yeah.
Again, you're talking about devices that were antiques by the time that I was born. So, and by the time I was on the station, we didn't use any of those anymore. So, not to put you on the spot there, but again,
that's okay.
What we had at the station was instant replay machines, which are essentially glorified iPods, where you would punch a number in, and yes, you would punch a number in, and then that corresponded with a song that was recorded into the system ahead of time by the music director or the program director, and you would have to look it up in a book because you would only have to press the number. Nowadays, radio stations nowadays are much more technologically and sophistically advanced. They use computers with automated software programs, and it's a lot more advanced. If you know what you were doing as a programmer, you would probably not really understand what goes on behind the scenes. But it's not too hard, and it's actually quite simple.
Yeah, I was still on the radio during the computer era. So I think that my last radio show professionally was maybe 2010.
Okay.
So I was on the radio when everything was on computer. And I used to fall asleep because I used to get bored because I was so used to being active in the studio.
Oh,
and
right.
I actually had to be very careful that I remained awake. And so we still had back in those days in the mid 2000s, we still had some things on cart, some things on other formats, but it was mostly all on computer. Yeah. And we had some devices that were computerized, but they were smaller devices, kind of not like iPods, but they were just smaller.
Oh, okay. So you know how the field of broadcasting has evolved with the technology.
Oh God, yeah. Like I said, the only reason why I left radio in the mid 2000s was because my teaching job had gotten very demanding. I had to teach a lot of new classes that I never taught before, and I also had a business where I worked for rock musicians, and my business had gotten quite demanding also. So I couldn't devote the time to being on the radio anymore. So I just stopped doing the radio, and I think, like I said, I think the last time I was on might have been 2010.
Oh, okay. I didn't know you owned a business. I own a business. It's very small. It's an IT-related company. So
there you
what
go.
I do is I go in and I try to fix other people's computer issues.
Perfect.
So
perfect.
And I'm always looking for customer. The customer demand is low at the moment. So.
Well, you know what though? You probably know this, Jordan, but if you market yourself to assisted living where there's a lot of senior citizens and stuff, I bet you could get a lot of business from senior citizens because those are the people that want humans to help them.
True. Thank you for sharing that. I'll consider that in.
There's a lot of them in Syracuse area. There's a lot of there's actually a senior citizen, very small senior citizen home. There's two in Baldwinsville. There's one right on the river, which is and then there's another one that's like senior citizen daycare.
Okay.
And that's right along the river, and
the Silver Fox.
Silver Fox, yeah. Oh my God, I'm sure that those people would really appreciate any help.
I'm sure. I was thinking of Syracuse Home, which is on the Van Buren side.
Syracuse Home is also in Baldwinsville. Yes, you're absolutely right. So there's three places right there, right in Baldwinsville. And
not just Baldwinsville. I'm trying to expand. I'm trying to expand outside of the Syracuse area.
Well, there's definitely places in Fulton, and there's places in Clay, and you got a lot of that. But those are the kind of people that my father, before he passed away, he used a computer, and he would always call someone like you to help him. He would not. I think one time he brought his computer into Best Buy, but he mostly wanted people to come over to the house and fix it.
Okay, and that's what I do. Since I have no office, I actually go to to where the customers are. So.
Yep, that he used to call people just like you. They would come in, they would bring their car. Their car had all kinds of equipment in it, and they would come in and they do whatever they could. And my father's computers were always custom built, so that if the part went bad, they only had to replace the part. They didn't have to replace the whole machine.
Okay.
So So my father, because I was a computer teacher, so I told my father, I said, you got to do a custom build, because if you buy a proprietary machine, it's everything usually is. It's not as easy to fix a Dell or especially a Mac or any of those kind of things. I said it's not as easy. So nowadays they're so cheap that if I have a laptop that I only paid $300 for. So nowadays it's so cheap that if my laptop breaks, I can buy a new one for $300. So, but back in the days, and then the people who do gaming and graphics and all that, they like their rigs. They like their nice custom machines, especially gamers. They are they're not so into that proprietary machine. They like their own thing. They like their own graphics cards. Everything's got to be separate, and so good for you. That's good. I'm glad you do that.
Yes, thank you. And I saw you sent me, it looks like your resume or your CV before.
It's a CV, yeah.
Okay, before we started. And you have a lot of impressive stuff, and I saw that you're a technology teacher, and you're still doing, and it looks like you're still doing that today.
Yes.
We'll get more onto that later, but we got to talk about Mr. Jenner and your classmates. So, What do you remember most about Al Jenner, if anything, and your classmates?
Well, Mr. Jenner was my major inspiration for going into media, and also my major inspiration for becoming a tech teacher. So he inspired me both ways, both times. And it was difficult because back then the radio station was mostly boys, and there were very few girls in it. So he kind of helped me out to not, get intimidated by the boys club and all that. So I thank him for that. I have nothing but wonderful things to say about Mr. Jenner. Probably the same things you've heard over and over. So it's, just a great person. Of course, he's very missed. And then my classmates, we had a very diverse collection, which was one of the reasons why I loved WBXL so much. We had all genres of students. We had nerds. We had jocks. We had what we used to call them heads, but they're people that smoke pot a lot.
Yes.
We had the potheads. I don't know what they call them now. Sometimes some people call them burnouts. We had the hippies. We had everybody. We had hippies, the hippie people, and we had the band. We had the people who were in the marching band too.
Well, interesting that you mentioned that. I was in the marching band and WBXL at the same time, and I wasn't the only one. I could name at least 3 others, and unfortunately, one other who I became really close with, and unfortunately in 2016, she ended up passing away for very tragic reasons that I won't get into here.
Yeah. Well, when I was there, we had probably a couple of the most popular jocks that were like super popular that everybody wanted to say that they were friends with because they were just popular kids. And we had probably some of the quietest students that never said anything in class, never drew attention to themselves. But they found a place at the radio station on the team. Okay? So they found a place for themselves, and that was what was so cool about it, is that there were so many of us that were different. And I was one of those people that I was friends with everybody. So I wasn't in any kind of clique. I was a little bit of jock, a little bit of a theater person. I had friends in all parts of the school. I was friendly with everybody. So that's kind of how it was. And it was a really great environment for that reason. And, to this day, I'm still in contact with some of my old WBXL friends. And, I hope this interview will bring me in contact with some of the other ones out there that are still.
I mean, that's the goal. This is not only the goal for the podcast, but I'm hoping, and I hope everybody who's interested is out there. I'm hoping to coordinate some sort of in-person reunion event for next year to celebrate the big 50th anniversary.
Oh, that would be great.
I'm sure you'd be on board with that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, as long as the reunion didn't fall during a typical school year, I would be definitely willing to come in person. And maybe during the summer might be good, or if it was on a weekend, of course, that would be the best thing. But yeah, that would be great. I'm still in touch with a lot of them, so they're my Facebook friends.
And you're on the big group.
Yes.
Like most other guests on this podcast are. Do you care to give any 1 or 2 shout-outs that you have?
Oh my God, there's too many. There's too many shout-outs. I don't want to miss anybody. But I will tell you about one of the most famous WBXL alumnus.
Yes.
That'll be Rick DiUlio, who's
course.
on TK. Yep, Rick is one of my closest friends. So I'm gonna say out of my friends, my group of friends, he's probably the most famous locally in Central New York that is also a close friend of mine.
Yep, we had him on, excuse me. Yes, I already interviewed him for this podcast, which has not been released yet, but you'll hear from him soon, hopefully. I'm sorry, I'm so behind. I've been busy with work and other responsibilities.
A lot of work.
I'm so behind on releasing the episodes from the earlier guests, but you will hear from him eventually at some future time. And when you do, it's going to be great because he is one of the most famous WBXL alumni to come out of at least this radio station. I'm glad to know that you were friends with him and you have a personal connection because he's doing awesome.
Yes, he is. He's great.
I listened to one of those. So even though I don't listen to TK99 as much, I hear his commercials on ESPN Radio, Syracuse. Because
he does a lot of commercials. He does,
yeah,
he does.
And so I'm ecstatic to hear that you have a personal connection. So let's. I wanted to shift now into kind of a more generic understanding of the lessons that you've learned in your time at the station that apply to what you're doing today. And we'll start more generic and then get into the specifics as we talk about your career in detail. But overall, at a general sense, the main lesson, what's one main lesson that you learned that you carry over to where you are today?
Oh my God, show prep. Every day in the classroom, I've got sometimes 5 show preps to do per day. So because I might teach 5 different classes, different subjects. So each of those classes is a 45-minute show prep. So it's like when we used to do our show prep, same idea. And it's more involved because you're not just talking, you're doing things in the classroom. So it's like doing a television and radio show prep at the same time. The other thing that I've carried over would be I used to be in my radio days. I was a music director and assistant program director, so I'm very much into taking the pulse of the community and knowing what people are into and not into. So it's very important for me to find out what my students are into music-wise, what shows they watch, if they watch any TV shows, which most of them don't anymore, what video games they play, what entertainment choices that they make. So I try to take as much of the pulse of them as I can with that. So I think those are 2 of the main things that I've carried over.
Okay, and those are great things. So if I may ask, after taking the pulse of your audience, what have you found? Or tell me in a nutshell, what are your findings?
It changes. It changes every year or 2 or 3. The students that I taught in the early 2000s were into completely different things than the students are now. So I am going to say that what is sad is to see the students these days in my high school have 0 interest in radio, first of all, 0. And they've got 0 interest in television. They are all more interested in video games, first of all, is a major thing. All right, which has been like that for years, so that's nothing new. But what shocks me is that none of them watch the news. I shouldn't say none of them. There might be 1 or 2 that watch the news, okay? And they absolutely don't listen to the radio, not the regular radio. The only time that they might listen to the radio is if they're driving around in a car with grandma or mom and dad, if mom and dad are older or a little older. and then they might hear whatever radio station the parent puts on. But most of the time they've got their own AirPods and things, so they're tuned into their own device. So that's what I've heard. And it's sad for me because I have such a passion for creating video and audio projects. And I used to teach that, and now I really don't teach it much anymore because the students aren't really that into it.
It's sad for me. And if we have time later in the podcast, I'll get to my personal feelings on the ever-changing spectrum of how media is consumed by today's generation. But I gotta leave time for something else. And that's your big career. We gotta leave time for what you've done in your professional career. It looks like on your CV you were involved with big events like the Super Bowl and the Grammys and the Oscars, and
yep.
And you've done commercials for brands like Coca-Cola, Coors,
Yes.
Sears, HP. How did you make that transition? How did you get those gigs? And anything that you can trace back to WBXL that helped you secure those gigs?
I think WBXL gave me a head start. So I had more experience in radio because of my high school days when I was in college already than most of the other students did. And so I was able to get my first professional paid radio job I was able to get while I was still in college. So I was hired as a professional before I graduated college. And
Wow.
then I worked for some really great radio stations that they did live broadcasts from the Grammys. They did they did contests where they gave away trips to the Super Bowl. So the stations that I worked for were very highly rated stations. And if they weren't super highly rated, they were very popular within their target demographic of who they were aiming to, to focus on. So I worked for some amazing stations that had amazing program directors and great people.
Could you tell me the markets, or at least the call letters?
I didn't list it on the CV, right? No. Oh God, there's so many. All right, so, well, let's do a couple in Syracuse. I'm not going to do this in any order. I'm just going to tell you. 95X was a big one for me. TK99, TK105, K-Rock. Let's see if there was anything else in Syracuse. Not that I can think of in Syracuse.
Doesn't have to be in Syracuse.
Oh, I know. I'm going city by city. And then let's see. Of course, in Albany, New York, I worked for Pix 106 and WTRY and a station called K-Light and also a station called K100. And then there was a station called The Bone and 94 Rock. All these stations were in Albany. All right. And then I worked in Nashville, Tennessee at one of the greatest rock stations that ever existed. They're no longer a rock station, but they were a big station, one of the top stations in the whole United States, called WKDF. Then I also worked for one of the top stations in the whole United States in Seattle, Washington, called KISW. And why do I think I'm missing something? I might be missing some smaller market stuff, but those are the big ones right there.
So you went all around.
Oh, yeah. I moved all over. Oh, in Birmingham, Alabama, WGRR. I worked for a rock station in Birmingham, which was a lot of fun. Yeah, a lot of fun.
And that's owned by Cumulus, so that's the same.
It wasn't owned by Cumulus then. The owners all changed. The owners were all very different when I worked at those stations than they are now.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because...
yeah.
Yeah, so that was back. Okay, it says in August 2006. I'm just looking on Wikipedia. Entercom traded the station to Cumulus.
Yep. I never worked for Entercom or Cumulus.
Oh, okay. So you mainly independently owned stations, or owned stations that were owned by different companies at the time?
They were all different companies. I did work for what's now considered to be iHeart. Okay. I did work for them toward the end, but that's because they had bought up so many things. But yeah, most of the stations I worked for were owned by, I'm going to call it medium-sized companies. How's that?
Right. Okay. So what are your big highlights or memorable professional career moments? Like, for example, what years were you on the Super Bowl, Emmy? I'm not Emmys, I'm sorry. Grammys, Oscars, Super Bowl, college football.
I don't remember, Jordan. I don't remember the years. I just know that my radio stations did live broadcasts, and because I was a promotions director, I was involved with setting up those broadcasts.
Oh, okay, I see. It says you were the writer and producer.
Producer, yes, producer. That would be a producer is when you set up the remote.
Oh, okay. So you didn't actually go to the Super Bowl. Or did you?
I did. Okay. With that was a promotion where we gave away a trip to the Super Bowl, and our contest winners went, and I went with them.
Oh, okay, I get that.
So that's doing promotions.
So along that line, I gotta ask you, what do you think about the evolution of the halftime show performers over the years? Do you have any opinion on how that's changed?
It's every year is different. Some years it's better than others. It is amazing how quickly they can move that stage off and on that field.
Yep.
That to me, being a former producer of shows, to me that's what impresses me the most is how fast they can move people in and out of that field.
Yes.
That's impressive to me. Yeah, very impressive.
And it's interesting that you say that because I think that's very impressive as well. I mean, think about it. You have the game, and then you have the players and coaches on the field, but then very quickly you have to build almost an entire immaculate set that takes up the entire field. Then the actual performance is like 15 minutes at max.
Yeah.
And then you have to take all of that off the field and you have to reset up to play the second half of the game. So, and from a logistical standpoint now, I've never done any of this before, but I can just imagine it takes a lot of thinking on the feet and a lot of coordination that you'd have to practice and rehearse for several weeks or months in advance. It just doesn't happen.
Lots of moving parts, yeah.
So, now that we've gone over that impressive resume of what you've done, when we talked over those things, any more lessons or any reflections back on where you are at this point versus where you were at Baker?
Well, I've gone into career number 2, which is high school teaching. Career number 1 was focused in radio and the media. So, and then of course I had my small business, which was working as a virtual assistant for several rock musicians, and not just rock musicians, but other celebrities as well. So I had those 3 things have been pretty much what I've been focused on since graduating from high school. So radio and television, mostly radio, only a little bit of TV. And then, of course, high school teaching, technology teaching, and then also having the small business, which I no longer have, but I used to. It was quite a big thing for me at the time.
Okay, I get you. So, I don't really want to ask you to pick favorites. Out of those 3 different aspects, what do you think is the most enjoyable out of those? And
I'm going to say there's aspects of all of them that are really enjoyable. So there isn't one that stands out. Like it just depends on the years and where the media was at the time. So like I was in radio during what I call rock radio's heyday. When rock radio, there's one of the guys I used to work for, Jimmy Jameson from Survivor, and I think he had a song that he had on one of his solo albums called "When Rock Was King," or yeah, and it kind of talks a little bit about that. One of my program directors from KISW in Seattle, Bo Phillips, wrote this amazing book. And hold on a second. Hold on. I'm going to see if I can grab. I want to make sure I get the title right here. Yeah. I Killed Pink Floyd's Pig. And he writes in this book all the stories from what rock radio was like in the 80s and probably early 90s too. And from his book, anybody who had no idea what radio was like when I was in it will get a great idea of what it's like. And yeah, I just tell people, if you want to know what it was like when I was doing it, just read Bo's book, because it really tells it like it is. So yeah. So not any favorite parts. They all had parts that were amazing, and then there were parts that were very frustrating too, like ratings, like not understanding why the ratings were lower than they should be, and though that was always frustrating. And yeah, and frustrating when you got when the station changed format or got a new management and they took over and things weren't quite the way that you wanted it to go. So that was frustrating, and that made it difficult.
Okay, I just want to get a timeline of I'm trying to understand the timeline of when you did all these things. So after high school, 3 or 4 years of college, and then so it looks like, I want to say, mid 80s to 90s, you were doing all this radio, TV stuff, and then
I'd say about 80% radio and 20% TV. I can tell you exactly when I went back to college, because it was the late 1990s. Yes. I went back to college full time.
Oh, okay, that makes sense, because I see the year 1999 in a lot of your teaching activities, so that does make a lot of sense. Okay, so.
Yep. So I graduated from Oswego College. And then I became a tech teacher, and most of the classes I was teaching were related to the media.
Oh, okay. I see.
And that was for about 10 years. And then they started giving me other classes that weren't as media focused. And I'm going to tell you that was not a favorite part of my life.
Right.
Because I wanted to keep teaching media.
Yes.
But I'm not stupid, and I realized that the jobs that we need to train students for were not going to be media-based that much, really. And
yes.
So teachers had to learn how to teach other subjects, which I did. And I did. I taught a lot of things I didn't love. I'm not going to say I didn't like them. I just didn't love them. So that was a tough situation. But I still did my media work with my musicians. So that kind of fed that need and desire for me to keep my hand in the media world.
Okay, so are you still doing that, or not as much?
No, I'm not doing it anymore, because the most musicians don't want to hire and pay somebody to do what they think they can do themselves now.
That's understandable.
And like, for instance, like one of the musicians that I work with, he is very good at just taking pictures and posting them on Instagram with a little story about it. And back when I worked with him, it wasn't as easy for him to do that. So now it is. So he doesn't need to pay anybody to do that, to organize those things for him. So because there's not a need, for me to do what I was doing for the musicians like I used to. I was the virtual assistant. I set up all their appointments. I was their secretary. Okay. So that's the best way to describe it, is I was the secretary. And there's just not that much of a need anymore. So I kind of got out of it a little bit. And I don't think I'd go back to it because their wives can do what I did.
Yes, of course.
And it costs them a lot less money for the wives to do it.
That makes sense. And that kind of brings me back to when I wanted to talk earlier in the podcast quickly about how today's generation's media consumption is completely different than it was when I was growing up.
Totally.
And, now this is an on-demand world. And I've seen this, and I've been out of the media, or I want to say out of radio broadcasting for at least 10 years now, but I still do my own show, and I'm still an alumni of Syracuse's Z89. Did you know I was on Syracuse's WJPZ?
I think I did read that on Facebook, something in Facebook about you doing that. Yeah, great station. Great.
It is. And so I've been learning about how the generations have shape-shifted and what today's stations or today's media outlets need to do to adapt. And that's all about things like podcasts as well as finding online content. We see more stations using social media like Instagram and TikTok to engage their audience.
Yep.
And social media, especially now, more than ever. But that's been true for the past 10 years. Social media now more than ever is critical to keeping the station's audience, whether it's TV or radio, or even traditional things like film or the major networks. You have to meet the audience where they are, and if they're not interested, well, they may be interested, but if they can't find where the content is, then they're not gonna be engaged. And as like we talked about before, not many people in today's generation, what I mean today's generation is Gen Z or Gen Alpha.
Yes.
People who are 20, people who are in their teens and 20s now, they, as you said, they don't choose to consciously turn on a radio and listen to their favorite station.
No.
They're going to go on their phones. They're going to go on their apps. They're going to go to their streaming. And
yes.
they're going to either watch a show that's in the streaming platform. I don't know if they're going to turn on have you seen they're going to turn on the regular TV? Are they going to turn on the regular TV and watch what's on the major networks?
Not my students.
That's what I thought.
Maybe one or two per class of 24 students might do that, and that's only for things like sports, like the Super Bowl, or like the NBA championships, or maybe the Olympics or something. Yes, that's it. Just mostly for sports.
And that's not how it was when I was growing. We turned on not just cable, and I'm talking about not just NBC, CBS, ABC, but cable networks like Nickelodeon and MTV and CMT, Comedy Central, and even things like the Weather Channel or MSNBC and CNN.
Yes.
I was a big consumer of those cable networks and the broadcast. So even today, I'm a big consumer of the major networks like ABC, CBS.
Me too.
But also the cable channels as well.
Me too. I can't seem to cut that cord. I'm going to figure out how to do it. One of my goals, sometime in the next few months, is to figure out which streaming service is going to give me the best live, local options, because I can't use an antenna because I live in a high-rise apartment building and antennas don't work. So
may I suggest YouTube TV? May I suggest going into YouTube TV, YouTube TV. That's what
you suggest. Okay, I think that's a good recommendation. I've heard that from a few people. My sister and my brother-in-law told me that they did the research and they saw that Hulu was the best for that.
Oh, okay. That's probably true. It's just I use YouTube TV because I figured that's less expensive than paying a cable company like Spectrum or Verizon Fios.
So let me ask you this: YouTube TV, does that allow you to watch Channel 3, Channel 5,
it does.
Channel 9 live as it happens?
Yes, it does. And
okay,
actually,
if
that's
you
travel,
good to know.
And actually, when you travel, and I've done this because I have the YouTube TV app on my phone, and when I travel out of the Syracuse market, the YouTube TV app actually allows me to watch the big three networks in whatever market I'm traveling in. Does that make any sense?
On your computer or on your phone?
On my phone.
Oh, on your phone.
On my phone. If I travel out of the Syracuse market and I open my YouTube TV app and then they allow me to watch whatever, let's say, NBC, ABC station that's in that market.
Okay, so what you're telling me is that even that you're not limited to one device.
Correct, exactly.
Okay, that's good to know. It's good to know.
If I can do this on my phone, like when I'm traveling, I can open up the YouTube TV app on my phone, and it's just like if I were sitting in front of my living room TV.
Yeah, I really, really gotta do some more research on that because even though I'm a tech teacher, I'm so far behind the curve when it comes to that type of a thing. That's where I'm behind. I've sucked it up and paid the $170 a month cable bill, and it's just I don't mind paying over $100 a month, but the Spectrum plan that I have only lets me have like 10 channels. So it's not worth it. It's not worth it.
And I'm paying, I think, I'm paying $72.99 a month for not just the local channels, but I get cable channels. I get, I think, over 50 cable channels as well, and I'm able to watch as many Olympic sporting events as I can. Just a disclaimer: we are recording this episode while the 2024 Paris Olympics are going on. So
good.
It allows me to watch as much as I can. I can get Nickelodeon, I can get the Weather Channel, I can get CNN and MSNBC. So, and I can watch it on more than one device.
Well, I'm going to look into that then, because another friend of mine who was in radio with me mentioned that they use YouTube TV also. They like that. So I'll look into that. Thank you for letting me know about that.
Okay, so we don't have much time left.
No, so, I was going to say, I got to go get I live in an apartment building and my laundry's going to be done at like 11:20, so.
Okay, so, just any final reflections that you have before we, end this? Any closing remarks that you, have to say before we wrap this thing up?
I'm going to say that being in the media, specifically rock and roll radio during its peak years, really, really made me into a completely different person than a lot of other people that are my age or a little bit younger, let's say. Everybody wanted to have a job in rock radio. If you like rock music, everybody wanted to work for radio back then. You weren't paid a lot, but everybody wanted to work in radio. So we were celebrities. We were famous. People used to come out to see us wherever we were. And my current students, will never understand what that's like. They just will not. I sound like an old fart. But they will never understand what it was like for someone like me to literally be able to interview all the famous rock musicians of their time. You know, Aerosmith and Metallica and all those bands. I mean, I met them all. If I didn't interview them all, I at least met them. So it was. I considered myself to be a huge celebrity back then, and now my students could care less about me, other than just, I hope Miss E gives me a good grade, and I hope they have a good experience in her class. So that was very difficult to go from being very, very famous to being somebody that nobody was that impressed with.
That's very interesting that you say that. So I wanted to try to squeeze a Taylor Swift reference in this podcast somewhere. So I'm trying to come up with something here. So now today's audience knows who Taylor is and is very familiar with her music and whatnot. And sounds like you were almost the equivalent of the stardom that she has now back in your career working for rock radio. And
I wouldn't say that I was anything like that. Okay. No, but here's the but though. I did meet people who were as famous as Taylor Swift is now. So that I hung out with those people for at least for a time period. Could have been backstage. It might have been before the show. It might have been at a hotel after the show. So yes, I did have chances to be with celebrities that were as famous as Taylor Swift is now.
And I just learned that. I'm sorry to interrupt.
I just don't understand. I don't understand her fame. I don't get it. But you know what? It's not for me to get, maybe.
True.
I think that she chooses or writes really super great hit songs. Yes. Like they're hits. They're catchy. They're good radio songs. So I give her a lot of credit for that. I'm not a huge fan of her voice. I'm not a huge fan of her type of show. But you know what? It's not for me to like, because that's not the kind of people we were watching back when I was a teenager. So I have to. All I do is say I appreciate what she does, and I give her all kinds of kudos for her success. But
it's changed.
But my students would not understand that a band like Metallica at one point was probably as popular as she.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I broadcasted from Monsters of Rock when they played there in New Jersey, and I talked to them and I interviewed them backstage. And I have a picture of myself with a couple of the guys from Metallica. So my students just look at that and they go, oh well, they just like shrug their shoulders and go, oh well. They don't think much of it, but they don't understand that they were as popular, or maybe not quite as insanely popular as she is, but you're pretty close.
I wanted to quickly say that I read on Syracuse History and Instagram, she was actually in Syracuse opening for, Rascal Flatts and Tom Pace back in 2000.
Yeah, she was.
2007 and 8.
Country. She was pretty much in the country scene for a while. You're right.
Okay. Well, we're going to quickly wrap up. It's going for almost an hour, and I want to make sure that we hit the post. So, what I like to do with all my guests is imagine you're back at the WBXL studio and sign us off, please.
Oh my, that's a lot of pressure. All right. Okay. Well, it's been great talking with you, Jordan. It's been great sharing these stories with your many listeners. And I hope one of these days we can have a WBXL reunion and see a lot of the people that continued the WBXL tradition like you as the years progressed.
So what was your nickname? Did you have a nickname? I was expecting something like nickname X signing off or something.
Oh, no, I never signed off like that.
Oh.
But I didn't used to be not that obvious. I use many radio names, but the one that most people in Syracuse know me as is Lisa Walker.
Okay.
That's the one that they know me. So, Lisa Walker, over and out. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, and we just hit the post. 30 seconds off the top of the hour. Thanks again for listening to The Buzz Goes Gold, a podcast celebrating 50 years of broadcasting excellence on WBXL 90.5 FM. This podcast is produced exclusively by the alumni of WBXL, with hosting duties by yours truly, Jordan Hayes, class of 07, and the intro voice by Rick DiUlio. Many special thanks go out to WJPZ alumnus John Jag Gay, class of 2002, for the inspiration behind this podcast and his helpful tips and advice for making it go.